All right, everyone, welcome back. Today's game is Nakamura, Hikaru against Carlson Magnus. You're going to love this one. Nice. Okay, so this is the Nimzovich-Larsen attack with b3, and you know what? It's actually a pretty solid choice here. White's immediately putting pressure on that long diagonal and getting the bishop aimed toward the center, which is always nice to have. Here's the thing, though. The engine's telling us that e4 was actually the strongest move, giving White a slightly better eval, but honestly, b3 is still perfectly playable. It's one of those openings where you're saying, I'm not going to give you the mainline theory battle, and instead you're trying to get interesting, unbalanced positions right from move 1. The cool part about this move is it keeps things flexible. White can still castle either side, and hasn't committed the central pawns yet. Beautiful! Okay, so black just plays the most natural move on the board with e5, and honestly, this is exactly what you want to be doing here. You know what I love about this? It's grabbing that central space immediately and saying, hey, I'm not going to let white just dominate the center for free. The engine actually likes this move. It's the top choice. And you can see why, because now black's got equal control over those key d4 and f4 squares. Here's the thing about openings like this. You've got to fight for the center early. And e5 does exactly that while also opening up lines for the bishop on f8 and potentially the queen later. It's just solid, principled chess. Nothing fancy, but sometimes the best moves are the ones that simply make sense. Excellent. This is exactly what white wants to be doing here. bb2 is just a perfect developing move that puts immediate pressure on that long diagonal. You can see how the bishop is eyeing the g7 square, and it's also supporting central control, which is huge in these opening positions. Here's the thing about this move. It doesn't just develop a piece, it's actually improving white's position significantly because now black has to be really careful about their king's safety. The engine jumped from slightly favoring black to giving white a small edge, and that's because this bishop on b2 is going to be a monster for the rest of the game. You know what I love about moves like this? They look simple, but they're setting up so many tactical possibilities down the road. White's already threatening to create some serious problems on the king side. Excellent. This is exactly what black should be doing here. nc6 develops the knight to its most natural square and immediately puts pressure on that central e4 pawn. You know what I love about this move? It's not just developing for the sake of developing. It's actually creating concrete threats that white has to think about. The knight from c6 is perfectly placed to support a future d5 push, which is one of black's main ideas in these openings. Here's the thing. Moves like this are why chess fundamentals matter so much. Black's not getting fancy or trying anything tricky, just solid development that improves the position and keeps all options open. That slight eval swing to 0.08 shows the engine thinks black has equalized perfectly, which is exactly what you want with the black pieces. Risky. Okay, so c4 looks ambitious. White's trying to grab space on the queen's side and put pressure on black's center, but here's the thing. It actually gives black some nice counterplay opportunities. You know what the engine's picking up on? After c4, black can potentially strike back with moves like d5. And suddenly, white's pawn structure gets a bit loose. Actually, e3 was better here because it just solidly supports the center, keeps everything nice and compact, and doesn't give black these tactical shots. The thing is, c4 isn't terrible. It's the kind of move you see strong players make when they're feeling confident. But in this specific position, it's just a bit premature when you've got more solid developing moves available. Hang on, e3 is what the computer likes. After nf6, notice the improved position. After nf3, notice the improved position. That was better, but c4 was chosen. Nice. So black's going for the fianchetto setup here with g6. And honestly, that's a really solid choice. You can see they're preparing to drop that bishop on g7 where it's going to have this beautiful long diagonal pointing right at white's king side. Here's the thing, though. The engine actually prefers ng7, which is more direct development, but g6 doesn't give up much at all. You know what I like about this move? It's setting up long-term pressure and giving black's king a nice escape square on g7 later. The position's still pretty balanced. Maybe white's got a tiny edge, but black's building something here that could be dangerous in the middle game. Risky. Okay, so this e3 move really bothers me because it's just too passive for what white needs here. You know what? When you play e3, you're basically saying, I don't want to fight for the center. And that's not the energy we want this early in the game. Here's the thing. It blocks in your light-squared bishop on c1, which is already going to struggle to find a good square. Actually, nf3 was way better because it develops a piece, controls those key central squares like e5 and d4, and keeps all your options open. The engine's not happy with this because white's losing that initial tempo advantage, and in positions like this, every move counts when you're trying to build up your development lead. Actually, nf3 was the move. I'll play it out. Now bg7, see the better placement? After e3, notice the improved position. In reality, e3 happened. Let's continue. Excellent. That's exactly what you want to see in the king's Indian defense. Black gets that dark squared bishop on the long diagonal where it's gonna be a monster. You know what's beautiful about bg7? It's not just developing a piece, it's putting pressure on that entire a1 h8 diagonal, eyeing squares like d4, and potentially even b2 later on. Here's the thing about this setup. That bishop is going to be black's key attacking piece once they start their typical king-side pawn storm with moves like f5 and h5. The engine actually shows the position equalizing after this move, which tells you just how solid black's setup is becoming. In king's Indian positions like this, getting your pieces to their ideal squares early is crucial, and bg7 does exactly that. Brilliant! White develops the knight to its most natural square, and honestly, this is just textbook opening play. You know what I love about nf3? It's doing multiple jobs at once. The knight's eyeing that central e5 square, it's preparing kingside castling, and it's keeping all of white's options open for the middle game. Here's the thing, though. Black's definitely not worse after this move. We can see the evaluation actually swings slightly in their favor, which is totally normal in these balanced openings. The knight on f3 is just rock solid, and in positions like this, you really want to get your pieces out to active squares before committing to any pawn breaks. It's one of those moves where you're not trying to be fancy, you're just developing with purpose and keeping the tension. Spot on. Black finds the most natural and solid continuation here with d6. You know what's really nice about this move? It's doing multiple jobs at once. It's supporting that pawn on e5, giving the dark squared bishop a lovely escape square on e7, and just solidifying the whole pawn structure. Here's the thing, though. The engine's showing us that white actually gets a tiny bit better after this, going from slightly worse to slightly better for white. But honestly, that's just the nature of these classical openings. Black's playing for equality and long-term counterplay, not trying to grab some crazy advantage on move 5. The position stays nice and balanced, and black's got plenty of good piece development coming up. Questionable. Okay, so nc3 isn't terrible, but it's just not what the position's asking for right now. Here's the thing. You're developing a piece, sure, but you're not really addressing black's setup in the center. Actually, b2 was better because it completes your kingside development and keeps your options open for castling. You know what happens with nc3? It commits the knight early when you might want more flexibility later, and honestly, it doesn't put any real pressure on black's position. The engine's showing this swing from slightly better for white to slightly better for black, and that's because you're letting your opponent dictate the pace instead of keeping the initiative. The engine wanted b2, let's see why. After nh6, notice the improved position. Then 0-0, creating better opportunities. In reality, nc3 happened. Let's continue. Questionable. Look, I get it. nf6 looks totally natural. It's developing toward the center and eyeing some key squares, but here's the thing. It's actually walking right into white's plans. The knight on f6 can get harassed pretty easily, and white's got some nice pawn advances that'll make this piece uncomfortable. Actually, nh6 was the way to go here. Yeah, it looks weird having the knight on the rim, but from h6, it can actually reroute to f7 or f5 depending on what white does. You know what? Sometimes in chess, the normal developing move isn't the best one, and this position is a perfect example of that. The engine's telling us we went from slightly better for black to slightly better for white just because of this knight placement. Hang on, nh6 is what the computer likes. Now d3, see the better placement? Now o0, see the better placement? But nf6 was played. Back to the game. Questionable. Okay, so this d4 push looks natural, but here's the thing. It's actually giving black some decent chances to equalize. You know what white should have done? Actually, be2 was better, just developing smoothly and keeping things flexible. The problem with d4 right now is that it opens up the center before white's pieces are really coordinated, and black can strike back with moves like c5 or even consider d5 themselves. In positions like this, you want to complete your development first. Get that bishop to e2, maybe castle, then think about central advances. It's not a disaster or anything, but white's letting that small advantage slip away when there was no real need to rush in the center. Actually, b2 was the move. I'll play it out. Now o0, see the better placement? Then d3, creating better opportunities. In reality, d4 happened. Let's continue. That works. Okay, so black just gets the king to safety, which is totally reasonable here. You don't want to leave your king in the center too long. The engine saying bf5 was a bit more accurate, hitting that e4 pawn and developing with tempo, but honestly, castling is such a natural move. Here's the thing. Sometimes you've got to prioritize king safety over getting the most active piece development, and that's exactly what's happening. The position's basically equal either way, so it's not like black's making any real mistake. You know what? In these kind of open positions where both sides are developing quickly, getting your king tucked away is never a bad call. That works. Okay, so be2 is a totally reasonable developing move. You're getting the bishop to a safe square where it's not going to get harassed, and you're keeping your options open for castling kingside. The engine's saying d5 was a bit more ambitious, and I can see why. That central pawn break would have put immediate pressure on black's position and opened up some nice lines for your pieces. But here's the thing. b2 doesn't really hurt you at all. You're just playing it a little more positionally, keeping things solid rather than going for that sharp central tension. In positions like this, both approaches can work fine. Sometimes it's worth taking the safe route and building up your position step by step. Questionable. So black's going with re8 here, and I get the idea. They want to put pressure on the e-file and maybe support a future e5 push. But here's the thing. It's not really accomplishing much right now since there's nothing concrete to attack on that file. Actually, bf5 was way better because it develops the bishop to an active square where it's eyeing both the king side and controlling that important central diagonal. You know what? The rook move just feels a bit passive when black should be fighting for piece activity in the center. After bf5, the bishop would have been perfectly placed to support central breaks or even participate in kingside play later on. The engine wanted bf5, let's see why. Then d5, creating better opportunity. Now in b4, see the better placement? That was better, but re8 was chosen. Not ideal. You know what? White's just giving up the center here for no real reason. After dxe5, black gets to recapture and suddenly they've got much better piece activity. Actually, d5 was the move, because it's keeping that pawn tension and putting real pressure on black's setup. Here's the thing about these central pawn breaks. You don't want to release the tension unless you're getting something concrete back, like a lead in development or an attack on the king. But with dxe5, white's basically handing black the initiative on a silver platter, and now black can start coordinating their pieces much more comfortably. The engine wanted d5, let's see why. Then nb8, creating better opportunities. Then e4, creating better opportunities. That was better, but dxe5 was chosen. Perfect. Black just nails it with dxe5, and you can see why this is the only logical response here. Okay, so when white plays that central pawn break, you've got to meet it head on. There's no backing down from this fight in the center. What's really nice about this capture is that black's maintaining excellent piece activity while keeping the position completely balanced. You know what I love about this move? It's not just recapturing material, it's actually improving black's position, because now that e5 square becomes this beautiful outpost for the knight later on. Here's the thing. In these symmetric pawn structures, you can't afford to let your opponent get a free central pawn, and black correctly challenges white's space advantage immediately. The evaluation swinging from slightly worse to slightly better just shows how important these central battles are. Excellent. White just nails the most accurate capture here with qxd8. You know what's really nice about this move? It's not just about winning material, though obviously grabbing that rook is pretty sweet, but it's also keeping things completely balanced on the board. Here's the thing. When you're trading queens like this, you've got to be super careful about what kind of endgame you're walking into, and this capture does exactly that. The position stays razor sharp at basically dead even, which means both sides still have plenty of fighting chances ahead. I love how white isn't getting greedy or trying to complicate things unnecessarily. Sometimes the simplest, most forcing move is exactly what the doctor ordered. Perfect. Black's found the only move here that keeps things balanced. You know what's really nice about rxd8? It's not just recapturing. It's centralizing the rook on a fantastic square where it can swing to either side of the board. Here's the thing about this position. If black had tried something passive like retreating a piece, white would have gotten a nice edge with all that central pressure. But now the rook on d8 is eyeing both the d-file and potentially jumping to d2 or d1 later to create some back rank issues. Actually, this is a great example of how sometimes the obvious recapture is also the best move. Black's maintaining perfect equality here while keeping maximum piece activity. That works. You know what? a3 is one of those moves that looks slow, but it's actually pretty clever. White's preventing any annoying nb4 jumps and gives the bishop on c4 a nice escape square if it gets attacked later. It's not the most forcing move on the board, and actually rd1 was a bit more natural to centralize the rook and put pressure on that d-file. But here's the thing. Sometimes these quiet, prophylactic moves are exactly what you need, especially when there's no immediate tactical shot available. The position's still roughly balanced after a3, and white keeps all their options open without committing to anything major. It's solid chess, even if the engine slightly prefers the more active rook development. Reasonable. Okay, so black is getting that pawn right in the center. And you know what? It's actually doing some solid work here. The e4 pawn is cramping white's pieces a bit and giving black more space to maneuver. Here's the thing, though. The engine's telling us that bf5 was actually the top choice, and I can see why. That bishop move would have put immediate pressure on white's setup and been a bit more forcing, but honestly, e4 isn't bad at all. It's a natural pawn break that keeps the position balanced, and sometimes you just want to grab that central real estate when it's available. Spot on! White finds the most natural developing move here, and honestly, this is exactly what I'd want to play in this position. Okay, so what's nd2 actually doing? First off, it's preparing to jump to either c4 or e4 depending on what black does next. And you know what? Both of those squares are absolutely fantastic for the knight. Here's the thing. This move also keeps an eye on that b3 square in case black tries anything funny with their pieces, plus it doesn't block any of white's other pieces, which is always a nice bonus. The eval dropping slightly to 0.15 is really just the engine being picky. We're still in dead equal territory, and white's got a perfectly reasonable game with good piece coordination developing. Questionable. I mean, bf5 looks pretty natural. You're developing the bishop and eyeing that e4 square, but here's the thing. It's just not doing enough for black right now. The bishop sits there looking at e4, sure, but white can easily deal with that pressure later. Actually, ne5 was better because it's way more active. You're jumping into the center, putting pressure on white's setup, and from e5 that knight can hop to some really juicy squares like d3 or f3. You know what? In positions like this, where the center's still fluid, piece activity trumps just normal development every time. This move doesn't create any real threats, and now white gets to consolidate with a slight edge. The engine wanted an e5, let's see why. Then nb5, creating better opportunities. Then ne8, creating better opportunities. In reality, bf5 happened. Let's continue. Perfect! White nails this one with h3, and you know what? This is exactly the kind of move that separates good players from great ones. Okay, so at first glance, it looks super slow. Like, why are we pushing a random pawn when there's all this tension in the center, right? But here's the thing. Black's bishop on g4 has been eyeing that knight on f3, and if white doesn't deal with it soon, we're going to see some nasty pins coming. The h3 move forces black's hand. That bishop's got to make a decision, and none of the options are particularly appealing. You've got bh5, which looks awkward, bxf3, which gives up the bishop pair, or retreating to e6 or d7 where it's way less active. Sometimes in chess, it's not about the flashy tactical shots. It's about these quiet, positional improvements that just make your opponent's life miserable. Excellent. You know what? This h5 push is actually really clever. It's stopping white from playing g4 and getting that annoying kingside space advantage. Here's the thing about pawn storms like this. You've got to be proactive, and black's doing exactly that by putting the brakes on white's expansion plans. Okay, so the engine's evaluation swings from slightly better for black to slightly better for white, but that's just the nature of sharp positions. One tempo can make all the difference. What I love about h5 is that it's not just defensive, it's also preparing potential counterplay later with moves like h4 if the position opens up. In positions like this, where both sides are castled on opposite flanks, you can't afford to let your opponent get a free pawn storm going, and black's timing here is spot on. Beautiful. Okay, so white just castles queenside, and honestly, this is such a gutsy move. You're putting your king right into the storm, but that's exactly what the position calls for. Here's the thing about 000 here. It's not just getting the king to safety. It's actually bringing that rook on a1 into the game immediately on the d file. And in these sharp tactical positions, every tempo matters. You know what I love about this? White's basically saying, I don't care if my king looks exposed on c1, because I'm going to generate so much pressure that you won't have time to come after me. The engine's showing this drops the eval from slightly better to slightly worse for white. But that's just the nature of these double-edged positions. One small inaccuracy and the tables can turn. In games like this, castling queenside often leads to these insane pawn storms where both sides are just throwing everything at each other's kings. Not good. You know what? This h4 push just looks aggressive, but it doesn't really accomplish anything concrete. Black's not creating real threats on the king side, and it's actually weakening their own position. Actually, ne5 was better here because that knight would be beautifully centralized, hitting key squares like d3 and f3, plus it keeps the position more balanced. Here's the thing. When you make these pawn moves without a clear plan, you're often just giving your opponent targets to attack later. The engine jumps from slightly better for black to clearly better for white after this move. And that's because h4 doesn't develop pieces or improve black's coordination at all. In positions like this, you really want to focus on piece activity first before going for flashy pawn storms. Hang on, ne5 is what the computer likes. Now nb5, see the better placement? Now nd3 plus, see the better placement? But h4 was played. Back to the game. Spot on. This g4 push is absolutely the right call here. And wow, what a swing and evaluation we just saw. Okay, so white's creating this massive kingside pawn storm that's going to give black some serious headaches. Here's the thing, though. While it looks super aggressive, black's about to get some fantastic counterplay that completely flips the position. You know what I love about moves like g4? They're committal. Once you push that pawn, there's no going back, and your king gets a bit more exposed. But in this setup, white's pieces are coordinated enough to support this advance, even though the engine's telling us black's about to equalize with some sharp tactical play. This is exactly the kind of double-edged position where both sides need to calculate precisely. Perfect. Black just cracked open white's kingside, and the evaluation completely flips from slightly worse to clearly better. You know what's beautiful about HXG3? It's not just winning material, though getting that pawn is nice. It's about demolishing White's pawn shield around the king. Now White's got this ugly double G pawn situation, and Black's pieces are going to have incredible squares to attack from. Here's the thing about captures like this. When your opponent pushes pawns in front of their king, sometimes you just gotta punish them by ripping the structure apart. The H-file's opening up too, so if Black gets a rook there later, White's king is going to be in serious trouble. Perfect. So White recaptures with FXG3, and honestly, this is exactly what you want to do here. I mean, you're keeping that pawn structure intact while opening up the F-file for potential attacking chances later. But here's the thing. Even though this is the engine's top choice, look at that evaluation swing from plus 0.72 to 0.70. That's a massive shift of almost 1.4 points, which tells us Black just equalized completely with that last sequence. You know what's happening? White had this nice little edge brewing, but now we're back to a roughly balanced middle game where both sides have their chances. The position's gotten really sharp and tactical now with these open lines. Spot on. Black finds the absolute best move here with NE5, and wow, what a turnaround. The engine flips from being down 0.68 to suddenly being up 0.67. That's more than a full pawn swing. This knight leap is just beautiful because it centralizes the piece perfectly on this monster outpost square where it can't really be kicked out. You know what's really nice about NE5? It's eyeing up that juicy D3 square for potential forks later, plus it's putting serious pressure on White's king side. Here's the thing. Knights absolutely love these central squares in the middle game, and from E5 this piece is controlling so many key light squares around White's position. The timing is perfect too because White doesn't have an easy way to challenge this knight without making some serious concessions in their pawn structure. Spot on. This G4 push is exactly what the position demands right now. You know what's brilliant about this move? It's not just gaining space on the king side. It's actually setting up a devastating pawn storm that Black's going to have a really tough time dealing with. Here's the thing, though. While this looks super aggressive and natural, the engine's showing us that White's evaluation actually drops from plus 0.63 to 0.68, which means Black suddenly gets some serious counterplay opportunities. The pawn on G4 does give White fantastic attacking chances, but it also creates some weaknesses around the F3 and H3 squares that Black can potentially exploit. In positions like this, where both sides are going for it, timing is absolutely everything. And while G4 looks thematic, it might have opened the door for Black to seize the initiative. Still, from a practical standpoint, this move creates tons of complications and puts maximum pressure on your opponent. Brilliant. This is exactly what Black needed to play here. Okay, so what BD7 does is it finally connects the rooks, which has been a huge issue for Black this whole game. You know what's really nice about this move? It's not just developing. It's actually preparing counterplay on the queen side with moves like Rack 8, or even a potential B5 push later. Here's the thing. The engine evaluation swings dramatically in Black's favor because now all the pieces are working together instead of just sitting there doing nothing. That bishop on D7 also eyes the important C6 square and supports the knight if it ever wants to jump to B6 or C5. Sometimes in chess, it's not about the flashy moves. It's about these quiet, solid moves that just make your position work. Uh-oh. White just played G5, and that's actually a mistake here. The pawn push looks aggressive, but it's not addressing the real issues in the position. Actually, RHF1 was better because it connects the rooks and puts immediate pressure on that F-file, where Black's king could become vulnerable. Here's the thing. When you push pawns like G5, you're creating weaknesses around your own king without getting much in return. You know what White should be focusing on? Piece coordination and central control, not these flashy pawn storms. The evaluation just swung from slightly better for White to actually favoring Black now, and that tells you everything about how premature this G5 push really was. The engine wanted RF1. Let's see why. Now BC6. See the better placement? After G5, notice the improved position. That was better. but g5 was chosen. Ooh, that's tough. Ne8 just doesn't feel right here. It's like black's retreating the knight to the worst possible square where it's doing absolutely nothing. Actually, nh5 was the way to go, because from h5 the knight stays active and can even eye some juicy squares like f4 or g3 later on. Here's the thing. When you retreat to e8, you're basically taking your knight out of the game completely. And in sharp positions like this, every piece needs to pull its weight. You know what I mean? It's the difference between keeping pressure on white versus just handing over the initiative on a silver platter. The engine's showing this swing from roughly equal to white being clearly better, and honestly, I can see why. Black's pieces just aren't coordinating anymore. Actually, nh5 was the move. I'll play it out. After ndxe4, notice the improved position. Then bf5, creating better opportunities. In reality, ne8 happened. Let's continue. Brilliant. Okay, so white just played ndxe4, and this is actually the engine's top choice, but here's the crazy part. The evaluation just completely flipped from plus 1.44 to 1.52. You know what's happening here? White's making the objectively best move in a position that's already gone south for them. It's like they're doing everything right tactically, but the strategic foundations just aren't there anymore. The knight on e4 looks fantastic. It's centralized, it's attacking stuff. But black's about to unleash something nasty that makes all of white's pretty pieces irrelevant. This is one of those moments where you realize that sometimes even perfect technique can't save a deteriorating position. Excellent. This bishop move to f5 is absolutely crushing, and you can see why the engine evaluation just flipped dramatically in black's favor. Okay, so what's happening here is that black's centralizing this bishop with serious tempo, putting immediate pressure on key squares and really cramping white's pieces. Here's the thing. This isn't just about getting the bishop to a nice square. It's about how it coordinates with black's other pieces to create multiple threats that white simply can't handle. You know what I love about this move? It shows perfect understanding of when to strike. Black waited for the right moment when white's pieces were slightly uncoordinated, and now this bishop is like a dagger in the heart of white's position. The swing from being worse to completely winning in one move, that's what tactical precision looks like. Uh-oh, that's a really questionable move right there. White just plays h4, and honestly, I don't see what this pawn push is trying to accomplish. It's not creating any threats, it's not improving the position, it's basically just wasting a tempo. Actually, nf2 was way better here, because that knight move would have centralized the piece and kept white's advantage intact. You know what? This is exactly the kind of move you make when you're not sure what your plan should be. So you just push a random pawn and hope for the best. The engine's showing us that white went from being clearly better to actually being worse now, which is a massive swing. Here's the thing. In middle game positions like this, every move needs to have a purpose. And h4 just doesn't cut it when there are so many more active possibilities on the board. The engine wanted nf2, let's see why. Now c6, see the better placement? After nc4, notice the improved position. In reality, h4 happened. Let's continue. Ooh, that's tough. Black just played c6, and wow, this is a massive swing in the evaluation. We're going from black being slightly better to white having a winning advantage. You know what? The engine's screaming that eng4 was the move here, and I can see why. Here's the thing. c6 doesn't really accomplish much except maybe preparing some pawn structure, but it's way too slow for this sharp position. Actually, ng4 was better because it immediately puts pressure on white's king side, hitting that f2 square and bringing the knight into the attack with tempo. In tactical positions like this, every move has to count. And c6 just doesn't pull its weight when black needed to keep the initiative going. Actually, eng4 was the move. I'll play it out. Then bxg4, creating better opportunities. Now bxg4, see the better placement? In reality, c6 happened. Let's continue. This is a mistake because white's just giving up all the pressure they had built up in this position. Look, I get it. Capturing that rook on d8 looks tempting. It's natural to want to trade material when you're ahead, but here's the thing. After black recaptures, they're suddenly coordinated and their pieces are working together beautifully. Actually, NF2 is much stronger because it keeps the initiative. You're attacking multiple weaknesses at once and Black's still scrambling to coordinate their defense. You know what happens after RxD8? Black gets time to consolidate, maybe push that past pawn, and suddenly White's advantage just evaporates. The evaluation swing from plus 1.27 to worse 9.08 tells the whole story. We went from clearly better to actually worse in one move. The engine wanted NF2, let's see why. Then B5 creating better opportunities. Now C5, see the better placement? That was better, but RxD8 was chosen. Beautiful. Okay, so Black just found the absolute best move here with RxD8, and you can see how this completely flips the evaluation. We've gone from White being clearly better at -1 to Black suddenly having a nearly winning position at plus 0.95. Here's the thing about this recapture. It's not just removing White's dangerous rook from the 8th rank. It's also centralizing Black's own rook on this incredible square where it dominates the entire board. You know what I love about this? The rook on d8 is now eyeing that weak d2 square, putting pressure on White's back rank, and suddenly, all of White's pieces look a bit awkward and uncoordinated. That's a massive 2-point swing in the evaluation, and honestly, this is exactly why you always want to look for these active piece placements, rather than just making passive moves. Spot on. White finds the absolute best move here with NF2. Okay, so this knight is heading to some fantastic squares. It's eyeing e4 where it'll be incredibly well placed, and it's also covering some key defensive squares around the king. Here's the thing though, and this is what makes chess so beautiful. Even though this was the engine's top choice, the evaluation actually swings dramatically from plus 0.84 to 0.84, meaning Black's about to get a real advantage. You know what? That tells us we're in one of those razor-sharp positions where one tiny inaccuracy can completely flip the game. The knight on f2 is doing its job perfectly, but Black must have some serious tactical punch coming up that White's gonna have to deal with. Problematic. Okay, so this knight retreat to c7 just doesn't accomplish anything meaningful. It's like Black is shuffling pieces around without a real plan. Actually, b5 was better here because it immediately challenges White's center and gives Black some concrete counterplay on the queen side. Here's the thing. After b5, Black's creating genuine threats and forcing White to respond, whereas nc7 just passively repositions the knight to a less active square. You know what? In positions like this where White's got a space advantage, you can't afford to waste tempo with aimless moves. The knight was actually doing decent work from its previous square, and now it's just sitting on c7 watching the game happen. That's a swing from being slightly worse to genuinely difficult for Black. Hang on, b5 is what the computer likes. Now cx b5, see the better placement? After cx b5, notice the improved position. But nc7 was played. Back to the game. Not good. Okay, so this knight move to e4 looks flashy, but here's the thing. It doesn't really accomplish much, and White's just walking into trouble. The knight's not doing anything special on e4, and more importantly, it's allowing Black to consolidate and maybe even launch a counterattack. Actually, rd1 was the way to go here. You know what? In positions like this, you want to keep the pressure on and control those central files. The rook on d1 would have been eyeing that d file and keeping Black's pieces tied down. But now, with this knight hop, Black gets to breathe and turn the tables. That's a massive swing from winning to actually being worse. Hang on, rd1 is what the computer likes. Now rxd1 plus, see the better placement? After kxd1, notice the improved position. But nc4 was played. Back to the game. Problematic. Okay, so this knight move to e6 just doesn't address what's happening in the center at all. You know what? Black had this golden opportunity with bxe4. That's actually the move we needed here because it's trading off White's active pieces and keeping the position balanced. Here's the thing, though. By playing ne6 instead, we're basically letting White consolidate that pawn structure and maintain all the pressure. The knight on e6 looks okay at first glance, but it's not really doing much work from there, and meanwhile, White's getting a huge advantage. In positions like this where there's central tension, you've got to deal with it head-on, rather than dancing around the edges with piece maneuvers. Hang on, bxe4 is what the computer likes. Then xe4 creating better opportunities. Then nd3 plus creating better opportunities. But e6 was played. Back to the game. Perfect. Okay, so white just found the absolute best move here with rd1, and you know what? This is exactly the kind of active rook play that separates good players from great ones. The rook's hitting that open d file hard and putting immediate pressure on black's back rank. It's not just defending, it's creating real threats. Here's the thing, though. Even though the engine says this is best, the evaluation actually swings pretty dramatically after this move, going from like +2 to almost odd 2 for black. That tells me we're in some seriously sharp territory where one little slip from either side completely changes who's winning. You can see how the rook on d1 is going to coordinate beautifully with white's other pieces, but black's probably got some tactical shots brewing that we need to watch out for. Brilliant! This exchange completely flips the game on its head. We're going from black being down 2 points to suddenly being up over 2 points. That's a massive 4-point swing. Here's what's beautiful about rx d1+. It's forcing white's hand with check, so they've got to recapture. And after rx d1 plus rx d1, black's getting this rook to an absolutely dominating square. You know what makes this so devastating? White's king position becomes totally exposed, and black's pieces are going to coordinate perfectly for a winning attack. The rook on d1 is just going to be a monster, controlling that back rank and supporting all of black's tactical ideas. In positions like this, where materials roughly equal, it's all about piece activity and king safety, and this move gives black both while destroying white's coordination. Spot on. White had to take that knight. There's really no choice here when your opponent just sacrificed material and created this massive tactical mess. Okay, so the engine's showing this huge swing from +2 to 2, which tells us that even though kxd1 was the only move, black's sacrifice was absolutely sound, and they're getting fantastic compensation. You know what's happening here? Black's probably got some killer follow-up that's going to put white's king in serious danger, maybe with checks or threats that are just impossible to meet. Here's the thing about these tactical positions. Sometimes you're forced to accept material, but the resulting position is just terrible for you, and that's exactly what's going on. In spots like this, you've got to calculate everything because one wrong step and you're getting mated in a few moves. Excellent. Okay, so black just captures on e4, and wow, look at that evaluation swing. We go from white being completely winning at +2.2 to black suddenly having a massive +2.2 advantage. Here's the thing. This bishop capture isn't just removing a defender, it's basically ripping apart white's entire kingside structure. You know what's beautiful about this move? The bishop on e4 becomes this monster piece that's eyeing both the weakened king and controlling those crucial central dark squares. White's king is now looking super vulnerable with that pawn shield completely shredded, and black's pieces are perfectly coordinated to launch a devastating attack. In positions like this, you've really got to calculate precisely because one wrong move and the game's over, but black nailed it here. Excellent. This knight capture on e4 is absolutely crushing, and white finds the best move in a sharp position. Okay, so here's what's beautiful about nxe4. It's not just winning material, it's completely opening up black's king side and creating immediate threats against that exposed king on g8. You know what I love about this? The knight on e4 is perfectly centralized and can't really be kicked out easily since black's pieces are all tangled up trying to defend. Here's the thing, though. Even though the engine says this is the top choice, look how the evaluation swings from +2.07 to 2.25. Which tells us black's about to get some serious counterplay if they find the right response. In tactical positions like this, even the best moves can lead to wild complications where one side gets a temporary advantage before the tables turn again. Brilliant. Okay, so this nd7 move just completely turns the tables. We're talking about a massive 4-point swing here. You know what's happening? Black's finally coordinating those pieces, and suddenly white's attack isn't looking so scary anymore. The knight from d7 is eyeing all these juicy squares like e5 and c5, plus it's defending key central territory. Here's the thing. While white was pushing forward with that aggressive setup, black was quietly improving piece coordination, and now it's paying off big time. That's chess for you. One accurate move can flip an entire evaluation. Perfect! White found the absolute sharpest move in the position with bxg7, and wow, this is gonna get messy fast. So what's happening here is white's sacrificing the bishop to rip open black's king side. You know, classic attacking chess where material doesn't matter if you can get to the enemy king. The thing is, after black takes with kxg7, white's got this beautiful follow-up that's going to expose the black king completely. Here's what's crazy, though. The engine shows this massive swing from plus 220 to 2.27, which means white's attack better be absolutely crushing, because if it doesn't work, black's gonna be up material and winning. But that's the beauty of tactical chess. Sometimes you've got to trust the concrete variations over the evaluation bar. Spot on. Black absolutely had to take that knight. There's really no choice here when material is just hanging like that. You know what's crazy, though? Look at how the evaluation completely flips from black being up over 2 points to white suddenly having a winning advantage of plus 230. Here's the thing. By capturing on g7, black's king gets dragged into this exposed position where white's pieces can create all sorts of tactical threats. It's one of those moves where you're forced to play it because you can't just let white keep that extra knight, but man, it's walking right into what white was hoping for. The king on g7 looks so vulnerable now, and I'm betting white's got some nasty follow-ups brewing with checks and attacks that'll make black's life miserable. Uh-oh. White just hung a knight here with nd6, and that's a massive blunder that completely changes the game. The knight on d6 isn't really doing much. It's not creating any serious threats. And now it's just sitting there waiting to be captured. Actually, kd2 was the move, getting the king centralized and keeping things under control. Here's the thing about knight moves like this. You've got to make sure they're actually accomplishing something concrete, not just jumping around hoping for tactics. The evaluation swings from winning for white to losing in one move, and that's because material is material. You know? Once black snatches that knight, they're going to be up a whole piece with a much better position. Actually, kd2 was the move. I'll play it out. After f6, notice the improved position. Then gx f6 plus, creating better opportunities. But n6 was played. Back to the game. Beautiful. Okay, so this is just a complete disaster for black. nd8 looks like it's trying to centralize the knight, but here's the thing. It's actually walking straight into a tactical nightmare. You know what's happening here? White's got this crushing position brewing, and this knight move doesn't address any of the real threats. The eval just swinging from minus 2.22 to plus 2.44. That's almost a 5-point swing, guys, which tells you everything about how bad this is. What black needed was something active, maybe trying to create counterplay, but instead the knight's going backwards to this passive square where it's not doing anything. In positions like this, where you're already under pressure, you can't afford moves that don't fight back or solve immediate problems. This is gonna hurt. Uh-oh. Okay, so white just walked into a complete disaster with bg4 here. I mean, look at this evaluation swing. We went from winning to completely losing in one move. The thing is, this bishop move doesn't really accomplish anything useful, and it's just hanging out there where black can probably attack it or use the tempo to improve their position. You know what white should have done? Actually, kd2 was the way to go, just centralizing the king and keeping everything solid. Here's the thing about these endgame positions. Every move matters so much more than in the middle game. And when you make a random move like bg4 that doesn't address the real issues in the position, you're just giving your opponent free chances to take over. Man, that's gotta hurt seeing plus 2.5 become 2 just like that. Hang on, kd2 is what the computer likes. Then a5, creating better opportunities. Now kc3, see the better placement? In reality, bg4 happened. Let's continue. Brilliant! This is absolutely the move I was hoping black would find here. So ne5 completely transforms the game because it's hitting that bishop on d3 while simultaneously eyeing the f3 square for a devastating fork. Here's the thing. White's king position just became incredibly shaky. And that knight is basically untouchable since taking it with the bishop would just open up black's attack even more. You know what's really beautiful about this? It forces white into these awkward defensive moves where they can't coordinate their pieces properly. The evaluation swing from 2 to +2 tells the whole story. One move and suddenly black's winning. In tactical positions like this, centralized knights can be absolute monsters. Excellent! bc8 is absolutely crushing here, and it's one of those moves that just shows the beauty of tactical chess. You know what's so brilliant about this? The bishop slides all the way to c8, and suddenly black's entire kingside just falls apart. We're threatening mate patterns, and black literally can't defend everything at once. Here's the thing, though. Even though the engine calls this the best move, look at that evaluation swing from +191 to 1.888. That's almost a 4-point drop. What this tells us is that while bc8 is objectively the strongest continuation, it's also giving black some serious counterplay that we need to be ready for. In tactical positions like this, sometimes the best move creates the most complications. And that's exactly what's happening here. We're winning, but we've got to stay sharp because black's about to throw everything they've got at our king. Excellent! Okay, so black just found the absolute best move in this messy position with b6. And wow, look how the evaluation completely flips from white being up nearly 2 points to black suddenly having a winning advantage. Here's the thing. This move does so much more than it looks like on the surface. You know what b6 accomplishes? It's preparing to kick that white knight with a5, but more importantly, it's opening up the long diagonal for black's pieces to create serious threats against white's king. The engine's jumping from 1.92 to +1.98 tells you everything. This isn't just a good move. It's the move that turns the entire game around. In tactical positions like this, these quiet-looking pawn moves can be absolute game changers because they set up multiple threats that your opponent simply can't handle all at once. Problematic. Okay, so white just walked the king to e2, and that's basically throwing away a winning advantage. We're talking about a massive swing from +1.94 to 1.75. Here's the thing. The king isn't really doing anything useful on e2, it's just kind of sitting there while black's pieces are getting more active. Actually, bh3 was way better because it keeps control over those light squares and maintains pressure on black's king side. You know what? In tactical positions like this, you can't afford to make slow, passive moves when your opponent has counterplay brewing. The bishop on h3 would have kept black's pieces tied down, but now with ke2, white's just given black the initiative on a silver platter. That's exactly how you turn a great position into a losing one. Hang on, b3 is what the computer likes. After c5, notice the improved position. Then bg2, creating better opportunities. In reality, k2 happened. Let's continue. Not good. Okay. So black just walked right into a losing position with this king move. The evaluation completely flips from being down less than 2 points to suddenly white's winning by almost 2. Here's the thing. That king on f8 doesn't really help with anything urgent. And meanwhile, white's about to consolidate all these advantages. Actually, c5 was the move here. You've got to challenge white's central control and get some counterplay going before it's too late. You know what? In positions like this, where you're already under pressure, passive moves like kf8 just don't cut it because your opponent gets free tempos to improve their setup. Black needed to create some threats of their own, and c5 would have at least given white something to think about instead of just letting them tighten the screws. Hang on, c5 is what the computer likes. After b6, notice the improved position. Now ndc6, see the better placement? In reality, kf8 happened. Let's continue. Beautiful. This bishop move to h3 looks so innocent. But it's actually a devastating tactical shot that completely flips the game. You know what's happening here? White's threatening to capture something key on the king side, and black's pieces are just poorly coordinated to deal with it. Here's the thing, though. This move doesn't just create one threat. It's setting up multiple problems that black can't solve all at once. The bishop's eyeing those dark squares around black's king, and suddenly white's attack is becoming overwhelming. What looked like a winning position for white just turned into a nightmare because black's got some serious counterplay brewing that we probably missed. Ooh, that's tough. Black just played a6, and honestly, this doesn't help with the main issues on the board right now. You know what? The engine's screaming that c5 was the move here, and I can see why. That pawn break would have given black some real counterplay in the center and activated those pieces. Instead, a6 is just... it's shuffling around on the side while white's building up this nasty attack. Here's the thing. In positions like this where you're under pressure, you can't afford to play these slow moves that don't create any threats. The evaluation just swung from slightly better for black to clearly winning for white, and that tells you everything about how critical this moment was. The engine wanted c5, let's see why. Then bg2, creating better opportunities. After ndc6, notice the improved position. In reality, a6 happened. Let's continue. This is a mistake. Okay, so white just played a4, but here's the thing. This move doesn't really accomplish anything meaningful right now. You know what's happening? White's basically wasting time on the king side when there are much more pressing matters in the center. Actually, b4 was way better here because it immediately puts pressure on black's pawn structure and gives white some real play on the queen side. The problem with a4 is that it's just too slow. Black can now consolidate their position and maybe even launch a counterattack before white gets anything going. In tactical positions like this, every tempo matters, and white just handed black a free move to improve their setup. The engine wanted b4, let's see why. After a5, notice the improved position. Now b5, see the better placement? In reality, a4 happened. Let's continue. This is a mistake. Okay, so black's playing c5 here, and you know what? This just doesn't work tactically. It's leaving too many holes in the position, and white can immediately pounce on them. Here's the thing. After c5, white gets this incredible outpost on d5, and the black king becomes way too exposed. Actually, a5 was better because it keeps things more solid while still giving black some counterplay on the queen side. The engine's showing this massive swing from like -2 to +2.7, which tells you everything about how badly this backfires. In positions like this where your king's safety is already questionable, you can't afford to open up lines that your opponent can exploit immediately. Hang on, a5 is what the computer likes. After kd2, notice the improved position. Now nf3+, see the better placement? In reality, c5 happened. Let's continue. Excellent. nc8 is absolutely the right call here, and you know what? This is one of those moves that just shows beautiful tactical awareness. The knight's heading to that outpost on d6 where it's going to be a monster. It'll attack multiple squares and really cramp black's position. Here's the thing, though. White's probably feeling pretty good about that 2.88 evaluation, but there's gotta be some tactical shot coming because look at that swing to 2.87. I'm guessing black's got some counter tactics brewing, maybe something involving the bishop or a back rank idea. In positions like this, even when you find the best move, chess can just flip on you in one tempo if your opponent's got a concrete tactic waiting. Excellent. Okay, so this knight move to c6 is absolutely crushing here. Black's centralizing this piece while simultaneously putting massive pressure on white's already shaky position. You know what's beautiful about this? The knight isn't just finding a nice square. It's actually coordinating perfectly with black's other pieces to create multiple threats that white simply can't handle. Here's the thing. From c6, this knight is eyeing some key squares like e5 and d4, plus it's supporting black's pawn structure in the center. What makes this move so devastating, though, is the timing. White's pieces are already uncoordinated, and now they're facing this perfectly placed knight that's basically saying, deal with all these problems at once. In positions like this where your opponent's pieces aren't working together well, centralizing your knights like this can just be game over. Excellent. NxB6 is absolutely the right move here, and you can see how it completely transforms the game. White's grabbing that pawn on b6 while simultaneously attacking black's rook, which forces it to move to an awkward square. Here's the thing, though. This move comes with a massive tactical point that white probably missed. After black responds correctly, there's a devastating counterattack brewing that flips the evaluation from winning for white to losing in just one move. You know what? This is exactly why tactical awareness is so crucial in sharp positions. Even the objectively best move can backfire if you haven't calculated all the consequences. It's a perfect example of how chess engines can find the best move based on perfect play, but in practical games, the complications might be too much to handle over the board. Perfect. This is exactly what black needed to play here. Okay, so, key 7 looks like just a simple king move, but you know what? It's actually doing some serious heavy lifting in this position. The king's coming up to support the pawns and coordinate with the pieces, which is huge in these endgames. Here's the thing, though. Look at how the evaluation just swung from -3 to +3. That's a massive 6-point shift, which tells us white probably had some killer shot that black just sidestepped. The king on e7 is perfectly placed to advance further, and black's suddenly winning this thing. Sometimes it's not about the flashy moves. It's about finding that one quiet move that keeps everything together. Not good. Okay, so this bishop move to c8 just doesn't accomplish anything meaningful. It's kind of retreating when white needed to stay aggressive. Actually, nd5+ was way better here because you're giving check and centralizing that knight on a monster square. Here's the thing. After nd5+, black's king gets pushed around, and white maintains serious pressure on the position. Instead, bc8 lets black off the hook completely, and now they can consolidate and turn the tables. You know what I'm seeing? The eval swing here is massive. We went from winning to losing in one move, which shows just how important it was to keep pushing with that knight check instead of this passive bishop retreat. Actually, nd5+ was the move. I'll play it out. After kd8, notice the improved position. Now nf4, see the better placement? In reality, bc8 happened. Let's continue. Ooh, that's tough. Black just played a 5, and honestly, this doesn't address the immediate threats at all. It's like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Actually, kd6 was the move here, getting the king active and centralized where it can support the pieces. Here's the thing. When you're already under pressure, you can't afford to play these slow pawn moves on the side. The engine's swinging from 2.89 to +312, which is just brutal. That's basically going from winning to completely lost in one move. You know what? In positions like this where white has concrete threats brewing, every tempo matters, and a5 just gives white a free turn to improve their position even further. Actually, kd6 was the move. I'll play it out. Then bxa6, creating better opportunities. Now na5, see the better placement? In reality, a5 happened. Let's continue. Uh-oh. Okay, so white just played bb7, and this is a pretty serious mistake. The evaluation just swung from winning to losing in one move. Here's the thing. This bishop move doesn't really accomplish much except maybe attacking that rook on a8, but it's not creating any immediate threats. Actually, nd5+ was way better because you're giving check and centralizing your knight on this monster square where it can't be easily kicked out. You know what the problem is with bb7? It's just too slow. In sharp positions like this, you can't afford to make quiet moves when your opponent has all these tactical resources lurking. That knight on d5 would have been controlling so many key squares and keeping black's pieces under pressure, but now black gets to consolidate and probably turn the tables. The engine wanted nd5+. Let's see why. After kd6, notice the improved position. Then bh3, creating better opportunities. That was better, but bb7 was chosen. This is a mistake. Okay, so black just played nb4, and you know what? This completely throws away what was actually a decent position for black. The knight on b4 isn't really doing much. It's not creating any serious threats, and it's kind of out of play on the side of the board. Actually, kd6 was much better because it centralizes the king, and in these endgame positions, your king needs to be active and fighting for space. Here's the thing. After kd6, Black's king would be supporting the pawns and staying in the game. But now with this knight move, White can just consolidate and push forward with a winning advantage. The evaluation swing here is massive. We're talking about going from a defendable position to basically lost in one move. The engine wanted kd6. Let's see why. Now Ndv, see the better placement? Now Ni7, see the better placement? In reality, NB4 happened. Let's continue. Problematic. Okay, so this bishop move to e4 just doesn't accomplish what White needs right now. You know what? White's actually missing a huge tactical shot here. Nd5+ was screaming to be played. Here's the thing. That knight fork would have hit the king and created all sorts of chaos, but instead, this bishop just sits there on e4 looking pretty, but not really doing much. The evaluation swing here is brutal. We're talking about going from a winning position to suddenly being way behind. In tactical positions like this, you've got to trust your instincts when you see these forcing moves with check. White's basically gifting Black the initiative when they could have been delivering the knockout punch. The engine wanted Nd5+, let's see why. Then Nxd5, creating better opportunities. Then Cxd5, creating better opportunities. But b4 was played. Back to the game. Problematic. Okay, so the king on d6 just walks right into White's attacking zone, and that's exactly what you don't want to do when you're already under pressure. Actually, Nec6 was the way to go here. It brings the knight back to defend and keeps the king safer on the back rank. You know what's happening now? White's pieces are going to swarm around that exposed king, and Black's lost all the defensive coordination they had just a moment ago. Here's the thing about centralized kings in the middle game. They look active, but unless you've got perfect piece coordination, they're just asking for trouble. The engine's showing this swings from winning for Black to completely winning for White, and that's because kd6 basically hands over the initiative on a silver platter. Hang on, Ne6 is what the computer likes. Then Nd5+, creating better opportunities. Then kd6, creating better opportunities. In reality, kd6 happened. Let's continue. Not good. Okay, so White just threw away a winning advantage with this knight check. It looks forcing, but it's actually helping Black out. The knight goes to the rim where it's completely out of play, and after the king moves, what's White's follow-up? There isn't one. Actually, Nd5 was the move here, centralizing the knight and keeping all that pressure on Black's position. You know what the crazy part is? The engine eval just flipped from +331 to 3.05 in one move. That's a 6-point swing. In tactical positions like this, you've got to resist the urge to give check just because you can, and instead look for moves that improve your pieces while maintaining the initiative. Actually, Nd5 was the move. I'll play it out. Now Nd7, see the better placement? Then Nc3, creating better opportunities. But Nca+ was played. Back to the game. Excellent. You know what? This is absolutely the right call from Black here. Okay, so kd7 centralizes the king and gets it actively participating in this endgame. That's exactly what you want to be doing when you're up material. Here's the thing, though. Look at that evaluation swing from 3.05 to +330. That tells us White just had some serious counterplay that Black needed to shut down immediately. The king on d7 doesn't just improve Black's position, it's also cutting off key squares for White's pieces and making sure there's no back-rank tricks or perpetual check ideas. In endgames like this, your king isn't just a piece you hide. It's a powerful weapon that needs to march forward and help convert the advantage. Ooh, that's tough. White just walked into a really bad spot with Na7 here. You know what? The knight gets completely trapped on that square. It's basically out of the game for the foreseeable future. Actually, Nb6+ was way better because it gives check and keeps the knight active, putting pressure on Black's position. Here's the thing. When you're up material like White was, you don't want to be putting your pieces on the rim where they can get stuck. In positions like this, you've got to keep your pieces centralized and working together. Now Black can just consolidate, and that knight on a7 isn't helping White's cause at all. Hang on, Nb6+ is what the computer likes. After ke6, notice the improved position. Now, Manbai, see the better placement? In reality, Nay7 happened. Let's continue. This is a mistake. Look, I get why Black wanted to centralize the king here, but you know what? This completely throws away a winning position. Actually, Na2 was better. That knight jump puts immediate pressure on White's queenside and keeps all those tactical threats alive. Here's the thing about endgames like this. When you're already up material, you can't just play passively and hope things work out. By walking the king to e7, Black's basically giving White time to reorganize, and suddenly that eval swings from completely winning to completely losing. You've got to stay active with your pieces, especially when the position's this sharp. Actually, Na2 was the move. I'll play it out. After NB5, notice the improved position. Now, NC1+, see the better placement? In reality, key 7 happened. Let's continue. Excellent. Okay, so White just played the absolute best move here with NB5, but wow, look at that evaluation swing. We're going from plus 336 to 337. That's a massive 6-point drop. Here's the thing, though. Even though it's the engine's top choice, this position must be incredibly sharp and tactical, where one wrong follow-up just flips everything upside down. You know what's happening here? The knight on b5 is probably creating some immediate tactical threat. Maybe hitting a key square like d6 or putting pressure on Black's queenside. But Black's got some devastating counterpunch ready. This is exactly why tactical positions are so dangerous. You can play the best move and still walk into a minefield if you don't see the full picture. Not good. Okay, so f6 just completely weakens Black's kingside and doesn't really solve any of the main problems in the position. You know what? This pawn move creates all these light square holes around the king, and it's not even dealing with White's most dangerous pieces. Here's the thing. Actually, Na2 was way better because it's heading to c3, where the knight becomes super active and puts pressure on White's center. The engine evaluation just completely flips from Black being decent at 351 to White having a crushing plus 3.96 advantage, which tells you everything you need to know. In positions like this where you're under pressure, you've got to improve your worst pieces rather than making random pawn moves that just create more weaknesses.
Hang on, Na2 is what the computer likes.
Now BB1, see the better placement? Now NB4, see the better placement? In reality, F6 happened. Let's continue. Excellent. White finds the absolutely crushing breakthrough with GXF6+. Okay, so this is just beautiful. By capturing on F6 with check, White's ripping open Black's kingside and exposing the king completely. You know what's amazing about this move? It's not just the immediate check that's devastating, but after the king moves, White's gonna have all these incredible attacking lines opening up toward the Black king. Here's the thing, though. The engine evaluation swinging from plus 412 to 432 tells us that Black actually has some serious defensive resources we might be missing. That's a massive swing of over 8 points, which usually means there's a tactical shot or defensive idea that completely turns the tables. In positions like this where the attack looks overwhelming, sometimes the defender has a counterpunch that's easy to overlook. Perfect. Black finally recaptures the knight, and look at this. The evaluation just completely flipped from White being winning at 433 to Black now having a massive 432 advantage. Here's the thing. By taking on f6, Black's not just winning material back, but the king is actually perfectly placed on f6 to support the advancing pawns. You know what's beautiful about this? The king on f6 controls key squares like e5 and g5, and it's ready to march forward with those dangerous passed pawns. White's pieces are just too far away to create any meaningful counterplay now. In king and pawn endgames like this, centralized kings are absolutely crushing, and Black's monarch is dominating the board. Ooh, that's tough. White just walked right into a tactical nightmare with NC7. The engine's evaluation completely flips from winning to losing here. You know what? I totally get why White played this move. It looks like it's centralizing the knight and maybe eyeing some tactics. But here's the thing. It's actually hanging the knight to a nasty fork or pin. Actually, ND6 was so much better because it keeps the knight safe while still maintaining pressure on black's king side, and from D6, it can hop to some really juicy squares like E8 or F7. The problem with NC7 is that black can probably play something like BD5 plus or another forcing move that just wins material immediately. In tactical positions like this, you've got to calculate every single check and capture before you commit to a move. The engine wanted ND6, let's see why. Now G5, see the better placement? After HX G5 plus, notice the improved position. In reality, NC7 happened. Let's continue. Ooh, that's tough. Actually, KF7 was way better here because the king needs to get active and help out in this endgame. Here's the thing. When you play NF7, you're basically just moving a piece without improving your position, and in these sharp positions, that's exactly what you can't afford to do. The knight on F7 doesn't really accomplish much. It's not defending anything critical, and it's not creating threats either. You know what? After KF7, the king would have been marching toward the center to support the pawns, which is exactly what you want in king and pawn endings. Instead, this knight move just gives white time to consolidate and push their advantage, and suddenly we've gone from a holdable position to something that's looking pretty grim for black.
Hang on, KF7 is what the computer likes.
Then ND5, creating better opportunities. After NBC6, notice the improved position. In reality, NF7 happened. Let's continue. Not good. Okay, so the knight's just stuck out there on A8 doing absolutely nothing. It's completely out of play, and white's basically playing a piece down now. You know what? The engine's screaming ND5 plus here, and I totally get why. That check forces the king to move, and then the knight's centralized, controlling key squares like E7 and F6. Here's the thing about knight moves. You always want them heading toward the center where they can influence multiple areas of the board, not running away to the corner like this. Actually, ND5 plus was so much better because after the king moves, maybe to E8 or F8, white's knight becomes this powerful piece that's eyeing multiple weaknesses in black's position. Instead, this NA8 just hands over the initiative completely, and now black can probably consolidate and start pushing for a win. Actually, ND5 plus was the move. I'll play it out. Now next D5, see the better placement? After CXD5, notice the improved position. But NA8 was played. Back to the game. Ooh, that's tough. Black just walked right into a complete disaster here with ND6. You know what? The engine's absolutely screaming at this move because it's hanging the knight to that bishop on C5, like it's just sitting there undefended. Here's the thing, though. Black actually had G5, which would have kept the game super messy and given real counterplay on the king side. Instead of creating threats against white's king, the knight just plopped itself on D6 where it doesn't really do anything useful, and white can simply capture it next move. In tactical positions like this, you've got to stay aggressive and look for your own threats, rather than just moving pieces to safe squares that aren't actually safe at all. The engine wanted G5, let's see why. Then H5, creating better opportunities. After G4, notice the improved position. In reality, ND6 happened. Let's continue. This is a mistake. Okay. So white just retreated the bishop all the way back to B1, and honestly, that's way too passive when you're in such a sharp position. The thing is, this doesn't address any of black's immediate threats. You know what I mean? Like black's pieces are still super active, and now white's just given up even more space. Actually, KF3 was better because it centralizes the king and starts to coordinate with the other pieces. Here's the thing about endgames like this. You can't just shuffle pieces around hoping your opponent makes a mistake. The eval just swung from winning for white to completely lost, which tells you everything about how bad this retreat really was. Hang on, KF3 is what the computer likes. Now NF7, see the better placement? Now NC7, see the better placement? In reality, BB1 happened. Let's continue. Problematic. Okay, so this knight retreat to C6 just doesn't accomplish anything meaningful for black's position. You know what's really frustrating here? The knight was actually well placed before, and now it's just sitting there being passive while white gets to consolidate their advantage. Actually, NF5 was way better. That knight would have been eyeing some key central squares and putting pressure on white's setup. Here's the thing about knight moves in these tense middle game positions. You can't afford to just shuffle pieces around without a concrete plan. The engine's showing this massive swing from roughly equal to completely winning for white, and that's because black just handed over the initiative for basically nothing. The engine wanted NF5, let's see why. After NB6, notice the improved position.
Now NX4, see the better placement?
But NC6 was played. Back to the game. Perfect. White finds the absolute best move here with NB6. And wow, look at that evaluation swing. We go from winning at plus 3.25 to completely lost at 3.28. Okay, so here's what happened. The knight on B6 looks active, but it's actually walking into a tactical nightmare. You know what? Black can immediately respond with something like RxB6, or there's probably a devastating counter tactic that white just overlooked. Here's the thing about knight moves to the rim. They often look tempting because you're attacking something, but that knight on B6 is now stuck on the edge of the board where it's way less effective. In sharp positions like this, you've got to calculate these tactical shots super carefully because one wrong knight hop can flip the entire game. Perfect. This knight jump to e5 is absolutely devastating for white. Look how it just dominates the center and creates multiple threats at once. The engine evaluation swings from black being down 3.49 to suddenly being up 3.52, which is like a 7-point turnaround. Here's the thing about NE5. It's not just occupying a great square, it's also eyeing that fork on D7 while putting pressure on white's king side. You know what's really beautiful about this move? White's pieces are so poorly coordinated that they can't even challenge this monster knight effectively. Okay, so if white tries something like F4 to kick it, the knight just hops to D3 or F3 and keeps wreaking havoc. This is exactly why centralized knights are so powerful in the endgame. They can attack multiple weaknesses simultaneously. Beautiful. White just delivered this powerful knight fork on D5, and I've got to say, this is exactly what you're looking for in tactical positions like this. The knight's attacking both the king and that loose rook simultaneously, so black's basically forced to move the king first. You can't ignore check, right? But here's the crazy part. After the king moves, white snatches that rook and the evaluation just completely flips from winning for white to completely lost. It's one of those moves that looks absolutely brilliant on the surface because it's forcing and creates immediate threats. But sometimes in chess, the most forcing move isn't actually the best move. You know what this teaches us? Always double-check your tactics, even when they look spectacular, because your opponent might have a nasty counter surprise waiting. Brilliant! Wait, actually no. This is a massive blunder that just threw away a winning position. Black had minus 3.56, which means they were completely dominating, but K6 walks straight into some devastating tactic that flips the evaluation to plus 3.69 for white. You know what probably happened here? The king stepped right into a discovered check or a fork that black didn't see coming. Here's the thing about endgames. When you're up material like black clearly was, you've got to be super careful about king safety because one careless step can turn a winning position into a lost one instantly. This is exactly why we always say to calculate forcing moves twice in winning positions. This is a mistake. Okay, so white's throwing away a winning position here with this flashy check. I get it. Checks look tempting, but this knight jump actually hangs the piece. The king just steps to G5 or H5 and suddenly that knight on F4 has nowhere good to go. Actually, NC3 was way better because it keeps everything coordinated and maintains that huge advantage white had built up. You know what's frustrating about this? White had so many good options here, but went for the most forcing-looking move that actually backfires completely. Here's the thing about knight checks. They're not automatically good just because they give check, and this one lets black turn the tables dramatically. Hang on, NC3 is what the computer likes. After KF6, notice the improved position. Now KF2, see the better placement? In reality, NF4 plus happened. Let's continue. Spot on. Black finds the only move that keeps them in the game here. Okay, so KF6 does something really clever. It's activating the king while simultaneously preparing to blockade white's dangerous passed pawns. Here's the thing, though. This position is still razor sharp because white's got some serious threats brewing on the queen side. You know what I love about this move? It shows black understands that in these endgames, your king isn't just a piece to hide. It's a fighting unit that needs to get into the action. The king from f6 can quickly jump to e5 or g5 depending on what white throws at them next. That's problematic. Okay, so white just walked into a complete disaster here with kf2, and honestly, I'm not sure what they were thinking. The king's now sitting on this awkward square where it's not really helping anything, and meanwhile, black gets to take over the entire position. Actually, nd5 plus was the move here. It's this beautiful centralization that puts the knight on an absolute monster square while giving check, forcing black's king around. You know what? After nd5 plus, that knight would be controlling like half the board from there, hitting key squares and keeping white in the driver's seat. Instead, with kf2, white's just passively repositioning while black gets free rein to improve their pieces and probably start some serious threats on the king side. Hang on, nd5 plus is what the computer likes. Then ke6, creating better opportunities. Now nc3, see the better placement? In reality, kf2 happened. Let's continue. This is a mistake. Okay, so black just retreated the knight to c8, which looks super passive and basically hands over the initiative to white. Actually, ndf7 was much better because it keeps the knight more active and defends key squares around the king. Here's the thing. When you're already under pressure like black is here, you can't afford to put your pieces on the back rank where they're doing absolutely nothing. The knight on c8 is completely out of play, whereas on f7 it's actually helping to coordinate the defense and could potentially jump to useful squares later. You know what? This move basically allows white to just steamroll forward with their attack since black's pieces aren't working together anymore. The engine wanted ndf7, let's see why. After nd5 plus, notice the improved position. After ke6, notice the improved position. That was better, but nc8 was chosen. Uh-oh? Okay, so this knight move to d3 just completely loses the thread of the position. White had a winning advantage and just threw it all away. Actually, kg3 was better, and here's why. The king needed to come up and support the advance of those pawns on the king side. You know what's really painful about nd3? It doesn't create any real threats, and meanwhile, black can probably start coordinating their pieces to create serious counterplay. In endgames like this, every tempo matters, and when you're up material, you can't afford to just make random moves that don't improve your position. The engine's telling us this went from completely winning to probably losing for white. That's a 7-point swing right there. Actually, kg3 was the move. I'll play it out. Now na7. See the better placement? After nd5 plus, notice the improved position. That was better, but nd3 was chosen. Ooh, that's tough. Black just walked into a disaster here with nxd3+, and you can see why the engine's evaluation swings so dramatically from winning for black to completely winning for white. Actually, nd7 was better, keeping the knight safe while still maintaining decent coordination. Here's the thing. When you capture on d3 with check like this, sure, it looks forcing. But white's king just steps aside and suddenly that knight on d3 is hanging with nowhere good to go. You know what? Sometimes the flashy tactical shot isn't the right call, and nd7 would have kept black's pieces working together instead of sacrificing material for basically nothing. The knight on d7 supports key squares and doesn't give white this massive material advantage that's about to unfold. Actually, nd7 was the move. I'll play it out. After nf4, notice the improved position. Now in e5, see the better placement? In reality, nxd3 plus happened. Let's continue. Brilliant. Okay, so white just played bxd3, and wow, this is actually the computer's top choice here. You know what's really clever about this move? It's removing that annoying pawn that's been controlling key central squares, and now white's pieces get way more breathing room. Here's the thing, though. Look at that evaluation swing from plus 454 to 4.64. That's a massive 9-point drop. It turns out that even though BXD3 looks natural and the engine likes it, there's probably some tactical shot that white's missing in the resulting position. Sometimes the best move, according to the computer, still leads you into serious trouble if your opponent finds the right continuation. This is a mistake. Okay, so black just completely misses the winning continuation here. Actually, G5 was the move to play. Here's the thing, that knight on D6 doesn't really accomplish anything concrete. It's just sitting there looking pretty while white gets a chance to reorganize. But G5 would have been crushing because it advances black's kingside pawn storm and keeps the pressure cranked up to 11. You know what's frustrating about this? Black had such a beautiful position with that massive material advantage, and now white's got real counterplay brewing. In positions like this where you're up material, you can't just shuffle pieces around. You've got to keep pushing forward and not give your opponent any breathing room. Actually, G5 was the move. I'll play it out. Now H5, see the better placement? After N7, notice the improved position. In reality, ND6 happened. Let's continue. Problematic. Okay, so KG3 looks natural enough, but it's actually walking into a tactical nightmare that completely flips the evaluation. You see, by going to G3, white's king becomes way too exposed, and black gets some devastating checks that just tear apart white's position. Actually, KF3 was the move here. It keeps the king more centralized and doesn't allow black's pieces to coordinate so aggressively. Here's the thing about king safety in these complex middle game positions. Even when you're winning, one careless king move can turn your advantage into a losing position overnight. The engine's showing this massive swing from winning to losing, and that's exactly what happens when you give your opponent tactical shots they shouldn't have. The engine wanted KF3, let's see why. After G5, notice the improved position. Now H5, see the better placement? In reality, KG3 happened. Let's continue. So that's the game. If you learned something, smash that like button and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what game I should analyze next. See you soon.